So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third Thursday lunchtime lecture for October 2021. This is probably one of the three top no vacancy talks we've had. It's good to see you all. And let's just get started. My name is John Mathewson. I'm the curator here, and let me just say that next month's talk will be by Peter Palmer, talking about bygone houses of the area. But today we have a special treat. It was advertised as Judy Harwood and Michele Pagan talking about the Dorset architecture. Judy Harwood, I am sorry to say, was in a very bad accident. She's in an induced coma at Dartmouth Hitchcock. And so she was not able to be here, but thankfully Michele knew Judy's parts and has stepped up to do the entire presentation. I'm very grateful for that, Michele. Thank you. Michele Pagan, in case you don't know, is a textile conservator in practice since 1984, and she moved to Dorset in 2016, where she quickly took up a keen interest in local history, and she and Ruth are, who's right there, Ruth Stewart, are working on creating a historic district in East Dorset, Vermont. Anyway, without further ado, Michele Pagan.
Thank you, John. Thank you. And thank all of you for coming. Yeah, Judy and I had been meeting monthly since the beginning of the year. And then more recently, we were meeting weekly. And then the accident happened, 48 hours ago or 3 days ago now, and she crashed and stayed in a coma since. So say a little extra prayer for Judy, that she comes back to be with us. So Judy and I both enjoy doing the work and digging up local history for you, but the best part is being able to share it. So thank you all for showing up, and I'll do my best to share both Judy's part and my part. The visual that you see here is from a poster that the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation produces, and the name of it is Vanishing Vermont. And I think you can maybe see it's a progression of the same building, sweet little Italianate house over here, in the course of 25 years, not even, becomes this house. So it's the same building. This is all about loss of integrity. This is what happens to a house when you take off all of the details that, in this case, make it Italianate. All the things that made the building Italianate are gone, and it has even transitioned from being a private home into being a place of business. So I'm going to be speaking today, and Judy and I would be telling you all about all of Dorset. This is from the 1856 Rice-Harwood map of Dorset. The orange section over here, this is the historic district, right next door here. This little section right here, compared to all of Dorset. So I'm going to be showing you pictures today from almost into East Rupert, up into North Dorset, up Madtown Road, up here, down into East Dorset Village, down to the South Village, and down to South Dorset. So just imagine that, as early as 1856, there were a lot of people living here. We have a lot of old houses. I hope you all are aware that exist, not just in the National Register District, which is this little area here. This, by the way, the little yellow spot, that's the original poorhouse. It shifted over to East Dorset, but the original one was here on the west side of the mountain. Okay, this is the outline of what I'm going to be telling you about today. I'm going to start with a little chronology of architectural styles, just an overview, because I know some of you are not from Dorset. You're welcome from other towns as well. And my goal here is to help you when you're driving around anywhere in Vermont, or anywhere in New England for that matter, to maybe start to recognize some of the styles that I'm going to be showing you pictures of today. So we're going to do that, first of all. Then we're going to talk about some particular examples of architectural change from Dorset corners. Guess what? right out here used to be called Dorset Corners. So I'm gonna be focusing in more, and this is the part that Judy would have been telling you about, including talking about some local duplexes, answering the question, how did we get to all these white houses with green shutters? Is the answer, well, we've always done it that way. Could be, right? Could be. And then we'll talk about what are the different historic designations, and maybe how you can help spread the word about what the real deal is with living in a historic district, okay? And then I'll be ending with a whole page of sources for more reading if you would like. Okay, let's start with the Deming House, which is located in East Dorset, actually. This is a picture from 1900, and this is what it looks like today. And you can see the little salt box profile here of this house, which you can only see if you're looking at it from the side, going up over Morse Hill Road. Next, we have the very lovely Washburn House, also of this early salt box style, located up here, right on Route 30 North, almost into East Rupert. And I think Sue would want me to let you see what it looked like when they bought the place. So don't anybody think that a place is too far gone, right, Sue? To be resurrected, to be restored. And interestingly enough, do you see the gas pumps here? During the 30s and 40s, this was a gas station, and here are the gas pumps over here. And it also had a little shop out front called the Maples, or the Frojoy shop. They sold frozen ice cream. Okay, so there's a lot of commercial entities that have disappeared over time, and this is one of them. And here's another salt box located in South Dorset. This is the picture from somewhere around 1900 when it was serving as the post office. And this is what it looks like today. All right, headed south now, going down to Manchester. This is on your right. And look at that very nice little, sweet little, if you've never noticed it before, there's the little salt box profile, roof profile. All right, so next time you're headed south, notice this little house on the right. It used to be the South Dorset Post Office. Okay, this is located on Route 7A. This is a picture from somewhere, let's say, in the early 20th century. This is the west facade, so this is the facade you can see as you're driving north on Route 7A. The back of the house, which you can't see from the highway, also is the salt box profile. So from this you can see there used to be an earlier section of the house, which you can no longer see because it's faced by the picture that I just showed you right here. This is what it looks like today. Now you may recognize, oh, that's what she's talking about. This place, unfortunately, is cursed by being in a bad location, I would say. It has Route 7A in the front yard, it has the railroad tracks right in the backyard, and Route 7, Vermont Route 7, behind the railroad tracks. But lest you turn up your nose at this house, there's been an entire book written about it. Entire book. This is the story of Colonel William Marsh, who was both a Tory and a Green Mountain Patriot. So there's a whole book written about this house. And it was also one of the featured houses in the 1943 story in Life magazine about the local postman, Mark Whalen. And here he is delivering mail to Mrs. Reed on the front of that very same house. So pattern of change. I'm going to be talking about 5 different patterns of change to you in the next hour or so. Pattern of change number 1 is what you see from the roadside today is not always the original building form. Later additions may be closer to the road. So what you may be seeing is the later additions are actually closer to the road, the oldest part being further on back, and you can't see that anymore. One example of this is Ira Cochran, Bob Davidson's house from, this is the 1840 section. There are 2 types of Greek Revival houses that you will see. This is called the eaves front, right? The eaves, the roof eaves are right here. That's why this is called the eaves front Greek Revival style. In the back though, again, look, here's your salt box, the salt box roof, right? This is taken from his backyard, so obviously you're not going to see this when you're driving by. Okay, so we're going from the saltbox style into the Greek Revival style a little bit. But let us not forget the very lovely federal style, which this is a very, very common style just about anywhere in the nation, frankly. This is the Ames, this is the Frost well drilling property on the west side of Route 7 as you're headed north. These houses are very, very, pretty high style actually. They have a very symmetrical kind of look to them. Almost always you have a recessed front door like you see here. Almost always 2 stories. And almost always a very lovely, very elaborate front entrance of some kind right in the middle of the building. Another very lovely one is the Caleb Buffum House from somewhere around 1800, transitioning now into the early Greek Revival style. This is what it looks like if you're looking at it sort of from the side. You can see the additions to the back side of this building. And guess what this house was?
Poor farm.
This was the second poorhouse of Vermont. Remember I showed you, of Dorset. The first one was that yellow section on the map that I showed you, being located over here. We think on Peace Street. That's going to take a little more research. So this was the second poorhouse. And as you can see now, this is the Greek Revival eaves front that I was just talking about. And these are the earlier sections, you see, further on back. Further on back from the road are your earlier sections. Another gable front Greek Revival. Now notice in this picture and the next one, this is in North Dorset now, the red section to the left. This used to be a barn, the red section. And I always wondered, driving by this house, what style is this? I just couldn't figure it out because I couldn't see a front door, right? Was this bay entrance an addition, or what was that? And this is the hard part about driving around and trying to figure this thing out. And then we came across this photo. So this is a photo from the 1940s, and can you see? There's the front door, okay? So this house is another gable front. It's called Greek Revival, with sections built on to that red barn. Now this is a very common New England, especially northern New England, farmstead plan. So when you're driving around and trying to identify old houses in the region, you may see this kind of, I hope you'll be able to remember this. It's called the big house, little house, back house, barn style, okay? The family usually lived here. Maybe this is where the earlier section of this house was. Maybe this is where the blacksmith had his shop set up, and that's obviously where the barns, the animals. So this is pattern number 2 I want you to see. This big house, little house, back house, barn is a section where all the sections are connected, and the storage areas, like for the storing the animals, became living spaces as wealth increased over the decades. Okay, here's another one. This is from a postcard that was made of this house around the year 1900, and this is the gable front with wing. You see, the roof goes like this, and just a wing off to either the left or the right. Okay, this is that photo is from about 1900. The Greek Revival style lasted a long, long time, from about 1835 maybe, even up into the 1930s. It almost became known as the national style. So you will see this particular profile over and over and over, with maybe the porches may have been ripped off, shutters have been ripped off over the years, whatever. And this is what this house looks like today. Okay, gable front, Greek Revival with a wing off to either direction. Okay, this house is another gable front, Greek Revival, but it has had Italianate details added. Those very fancy gingerbread brackets underneath the roof line, and the very lovely porch that has been added. So on a house like this, it's really hard to say, was that a Greek Revival first, And then they were keeping up with the Joneses and had because there were wealthy people living across the street, I can tell you. They had a very nice house. Were they keeping up with the Joneses and so updated their house and had the cornice pieces added and the porch added? Could be. Right up the road was this very high style Italianate on Mad Tom Road. Believe it or not, this became the Catholic Church's rectory for the priests for about 100 years. And this is what it looked like around 1900. And you can see the Widow's Walk at the top here was removed over the decades. At some point, we don't exactly know at what point the Widow's Walk was removed. But other than that, wouldn't you say it still looks pretty much the same? So now we're going into what we call post-Civil War Victorian style houses. And this would be called a stick style house because these houses featured exterior kind of stick. Can you see that? There's a vertical stick there, there's another stick here, there's another stick here. That's how it got its name. So this is post Civil War Victorian style. And these styles now, after the Civil War, happened because of the arrival of the railroad. And with the arrival of the railroad, which came through East Dorset, different kinds of materials and ornaments were now available to everyday local carpenters. And so that's how these styles evolved. And a 1900 photo, which we haven't found yet, shows this house painted a darker color, trimmed with a contrasting lighter color. This is another post-Civil War style, a Victorian style called the shingle style. This house is covered with shingles, and if it were in a different color, you could see the pattern that was made by those exterior shingles. The whole house is covered with shingles. There's a little bit of a pattern here, maybe you can make out right there. So that's another post-railroad and post-Civil War shingle style, located right here on Church Street. Okay, to continue on our definition now of styles that you may see as you're driving around, this is called the American Foursquare. Out west they called it the Prairie style. And it was popular from about 1900 to 1920, and it's foursquare. There are 4 rooms downstairs and then 4 bedrooms upstairs. That's the American Foursquare style. The Colonial Revival style, where is it? I'm sorry. Somehow it has disappeared. I'm sorry, Dom and Nancy, your picture of your house disappeared. I'm so sorry. This is a very common style too, the Colonial Revival style that happened from about, overlapped a little bit with 1900, was a revival during the period when we had a massive influx of immigrants to the country. And it became a thing in our culture to want to look back to the colonial style home and revive it. I can't imagine what happened. I just ran through this at home and it's not here. I'm sorry. We'll talk about it a little bit later. So this is called the post-War I bungalow style. And sometimes, remember this now, sometimes buildings are changed so much that they no longer resemble the name that they were, the style that they were named for. And the bungalow style is typified by a long, low porch, an open porch. And in this case, as you can see, half of it has been closed in over the years, perhaps for energy efficiency purposes, okay? But this is a very common style also from right after the First World War. This is what I just said. Sometimes buildings are changed so much that they no longer represent their original style. And then when you're putting together a historic district, like what happened here in 1986, and perhaps what we're going through, Ruth, trying to get East Dorset nominated, they become non-contributing. So just remember that. If you're driving around and you just can't figure out what style something is, it's just been changed too much. It's just impossible, and so it becomes a non-contributing house in that historic district. And this is an example of a post-World War II bungalow. This house was built in 1964 by a local architect builder out of Manchester named Milton Rockwell. We could probably do a whole presentation someday of just these. And you should know that when it comes to putting houses on historic registers, if a house is 50 years old now, it can be classified as being historic. So that would mean all of these houses built in Rockwell could possibly be considered historic. This is an example over in East Dorset of a mid-century prefab house. There was a fire in the original house, and no doubt it was an eaves front Greek Revival house that burned, and so it was replaced by the section that you see now. And this is even the advertisement from Aladdin Homes, which advertised basically a DIY your own home. You could order a kit and build your own house, apparently. And this house had the good fortune to be located right across the road from the railroad tracks. So I'm sure, and it was shipped from Illinois or someplace like that is where Aladdin Homes was located. It came in on the railroad, you know, and they trucked it across the road and had a DIY party, apparently, like a barn raising. They had a modern day barn raising, let's say. Okay, now we've finished our overview of architectural styles that you might find just anywhere. And now we're going to look at examples of change from Dorset Corners, also called West Dorset. Okay, so let's start with this one. John, don't you say a word here, all right? But does anybody recognize this house? When anybody says to me that a house is too far gone, please remember this photograph, all right? Does anybody know what building this actually is?
This one.
You got it right.
It's the building we're sitting in today. Is that amazing? You want to go back and see that again? What an incredible transformation, isn't it? It did lose the two chimneys though, look. See the two chimneys on it? But look at that sagging roof line. That's really bad, right? I mean, I don't know a whole lot about this, but I know two things watch out for. You gotta have a good foundation and you gotta have a good roof. So if you've got a sagging roof line, that's a really bad sign. So Mr. Charles Wade, who did this work of bringing in houses like this, did a pretty great job. Not only did this house get moved to Dorset, it also got moved a second time. So where we are sitting now used to be further back. And so the stone wall that you see at the back of this property, that was the original location of this house. And then it was moved to the situation where we are right now. Okay? Okay, this is the Union Store, which I know you all recognize from being right across the road here, right, on Church Street. This is what it looked like in the 40s. Look, with the 3 gas pumps out front, right? And this is what it looked like somewhere around, I'm sorry, I had the wrong date on that. This is circa 1900, okay, with the horse and buggy out front. And the people who wrote the nomination of Dorset for the National Register wanted you to know that this back section is the earliest section. So try to imagine that this lower roof line back section, at one point, that was the original store. So try to imagine that, you know, as you're driving by the store. It used to sit way further back from the street line. Right next door is the 3 Pairs Art Gallery, as it looks today, right? And just a few years ago, it looked like this. And again, from the National Register nomination, we know that the whole second floor was a 1907 addition. So try to imagine that too. Many of the houses that you see today actually have had whole second floor additions added on, so they were much shorter in previous decades. So this is pattern number 4 that you need to remember, that commercial buildings became residences, residences also became businesses, and many commercial businesses, like the gas stations, have disappeared entirely. Okay, let's talk about churches just for a little bit. This is the late Gothic style Congregational Church right down here on Church Street. This is the 3rd iteration of this church. Here's a postcard of the 2nd. So this is what the 2nd one, built in 1833 and burned in 1907, looked like. And look how similar this is to the one in East Dorset. 2 different churches, but built at the same time. The one in East Dorset was built as a Union Society building. In other words, there were not enough Congregationalists or Baptists or Calvinists or whatever to have their own church, Congregationalists. So they had a Union Society meeting house built. And that's still there. That has never burned, by the way. Okay, here's another lovely house over here on the north side of Church Street. This is what it looks like today. But again, here's the original section. Remember what I said? Usually the original section is further back from the street and is earlier. That's the case with this house. Now Judy Harwood, that we were just speaking of earlier, would want you to know this is her family house. Built originally in 1860 and then had additions added in 1900. Note the earlier addition, further back than the front section. Here we are again, earlier section perpendicular to the road, the later section parallel to the road with a nice new porch added on the front there. And Judy would want you to know this is her grandmother was living out in that house, and look at the difference in the porch. Can you see that? So this is more the Victorian style open porch as opposed to the more lattice style which was added later on. Okay? Pattern number 5. Until the arrival of the Greek Revival style, many houses were perpendicular to the road, and therefore it had a side entrance. So if your road is here, the original building was perpendicular and set further back, all right? With the arrival of the Greek Revival style, either that gable front or the eaves front that I showed you pictures of, the front of the house was turned 90 degrees, now facing the road, and it had a front entrance. And you know what? I have a theory here that perhaps this is where the practice began of Vermonters always using the side entrance and never using the front door, because that's what we've always done. We've always used the side entrance. Does that make sense to anybody else? It's just a theory. We need to find somebody's diary that says, yes, we always went in the side door and we had the new part built, but nobody's going to use that front door. We're going to keep using the side door. Just a theory that I have. Okay, let's talk about the Manley Lefevre House, now in business as the Marble House, over on Dorset West Road. The original was built by Mr. Manley, updated by Mr. Lefevre, and you can kind of see the earlier sections back here, the front section towards closer to the front, closer to the roadside, and the lovely Italian gardens that were added. Apparently, Mr. Lefevre, I believe it is, was a foreign diplomat and had served duty time in Europe, in either Spain or Italy. I'm a little fuzzy on that. And that's why these lovely Italian gardens were added, was as a result of Mr. Lefevre's efforts. The Jackson Barrows House was originally built in 1804, updated and expanded in 1939, and it has bits and pieces of both Federal and Greek Revival style represented here. Is what it looks like today, and you can see the 1939 section added to the back. And this, my friends, is the original Barrows House, which was up in Dorset Hollow, up there where the water wheel house, do you know what I mean? The water wheel house that's at the top of Dorset Hollow, that was the original Barrows House Hotel, or guest house, or inn, whatever you'd like to call it. Different building entirely now. Okay, so now we're at the point of talking about all the different houses that Mr. Charles Wade moved in. The Tyler House, the Houghton House, the Flower Book Pottery Shop right down here on Route 30 was moved in. The Blay House, of course, this one. The Herbert Erklentz House, the Barrack House, the Fields Magruder House, the Davis House. There was even a Pozzoni House, which was moved to Dorset and then moved again to Manchester Village. So a lot of not only buildings being moved in, but then sometimes actually being moved out. Okay. And they weren't always white, were they? Let's start thinking about that. They weren't always all white. Okay. So back down here in the corners now, this is the original, what we call the Armstrong store block. Today, the Carolyn Oriental Rug Shop is there. This is what it looked like in 1900. So you see that block, you see the Italianate roof trim there. And here it is in the 1940s with the gas pump over here. So we had many more gas stations locally than Dorset has today. Same building. And I'm including this in memoriam. This is a lovely federal style Farwell house, which was from 1813, located over on Dorset West Road. It was demolished in 2015, which really puts a stake through my heart, because I don't believe any building is so far gone that it can't be rescued. You know, you can sell anything to somebody for $1, even if they have to put $500,000 into it. You know, I think it can be done. So I'm always going to include this lovely house, which is, there's a Silver Stream trailer parked there now, where, yeah, great improvement to the neighborhood, don't you think? Okay, so we're going to look at a few duplexes now. Duplex number 1 being Dorset House. Who knows where you can see this house today? Is this still in North Dorset?
No.
This lovely house?
Shelburne Museum.
You can't. You know all the answers, Ruth. No fair. But this was built from somewhere around 1840. It was known as the Griffith House for about 100 years. And this is what it looked like by the year 1900. And Mrs. Habemeyer loaded it up, took it apart, loaded it up on the railroad, which was across the road, and took it up to Shelburne Museum when she was assembling it. And she paid, anybody want to guess how much she paid for this lovely building? $50. It was a lot of money. Come on, it was a lot of money in 1950. Right? But this is what it looked like around 1900. So by 1950, I can tell you, because we talked about this in a previous presentation, all of the plaster had been stripped out. I mean, it was a gutted shell when she bought it. There were no fireplace mantles. I mean, it was really a gutted piece, because the plan actually was to move this building back from the road because Route 7 was being widened. So that was the plan, and then the plan was interrupted. Here's duplex number 2. Some of you drove right past this house today. This is the house down here on Route 7. The owners who bought it 2 years ago, I think, have painted the fence out front black. It's a very striking house, yeah. Well, somebody told me that it's in fact a duplex. And if you look very carefully, you can't tell this as you're speeding by on Route 7 coming north, you can't tell. But this is their front door, and this is the alternate front door. And this is what it looked like from about 1857. And when I first time I ever laid eyes on this house, I thought, did there used to be a door there? You know, as with the other house that I showed you, they had the bay out front, you know, and that's where the original door was. So I was gonna put money on this, that if I found an old picture, it was gonna show that there was a door here instead of this chimney. I was gonna put money on that. Nope. On the Historical Society website, I found this photograph. And look, it shows there was no central doorway there. It was always built as a duplex. And the people who own it told me when they bought it 2 years ago, they were told that 2 elderly sisters, it was built for 2 elderly sisters. I don't know, you know, real estate agents will tell you anything, right? Anything to make a sale. So that takes more research, so don't quote me on that, but it does seem that it was built as a duplex. Okay, and duplex number 3, this is the one, does anybody recognize this? From the top of Church Street here, where Church meets Dorset West Road, is this lovely house? Let me show you what it used to look like. Can you tell me if you like it now or before? Cool, huh? I like it better before. I think I'm just partial to porches. I just like porches, you know? What do you think? How many people like it now? How many people liked it before? Yeah, me too. I think it has a lot more character. Okay, and finally, duplex number 4. This is over on Madtom Road. Classic cottage style from about the early 19th century. Single front door, right? Look at that. Don't you love the beetle parked in the park next to it? Kind of dates the photo, right? Yeah, so this used to be a duplex and now it's a single-family home.
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's an Airbnb.
All right, so now let's get into this discussion of how did we get all these white houses with green shutters anyway, okay? This is gonna make a good article. Okay, so you need to know that first of all, most of our houses around here had no paint at all, right? Couldn't afford it. You were busy keeping body and soul together, and so paint was a luxury. And so many of our old homes just featured a coat of linseed oil and maybe pine tar. This looks like it had a little bit maybe of red paint added over the years. Jenks Tavern up in at the top of what do I want to say? Where Dorset West Road and Route 30 come together up here. Jenks Tavern this is a picture of how it looks today, and you can see the early photo there. I don't know, was that ever painted, do you think? Or is that one of these unpainted buildings that I've been talking about? Okay, so little by little though, as local wealth increased, people could afford to hire someone or mix up their own turkey red paint. Now remember, at the time, you couldn't go to H.M. Williams hardware store to buy paint. You had to literally buy the pigment that had come out of the ground and crush it up and mix it with linseed oil or something similar, and that was considered a paint, okay? Little by little, that's what people started to do. It was a lot of work, so you didn't paint your whole building red, did you? You just did a little bit of trim, right? This is one type of ochre being mined. It comes in many different colors, and you should know that the 1810 census out of Bennington, which listed only about 7 commercial entities total, included an ochre mine. So having ochre at your disposal was not that far-fetched for people in this part of Vermont. Maybe there would be a peddler. Maybe there would be somebody who could go down with a wagon to the quarry and come back with barrels full of this ochre dust, basically, or particles, chunks, let's call them, that had to be ground. And I have read that if you burn ochre, it turns red. So there you go. So you could get a yellow ochre out of the ground. And I also remember that by about 1825, I found an advertisement in the local paper in Bennington advertising yellow and brown paint. Now what they meant was the particles coming out of the earth, yellow and brown, that then you could pound and mix yourself to make yellow and brown paint. It's very interesting to me that the Frost house that I mentioned earlier on the west side of Route 7 has this particular paint scheme. It's a cream-colored painted clapboard house with white trim and a red door. I was at the Bennington Museum recently, and look at this painting of Elijah Dewey, and look at his house is painted in the background, and it's the exact same color scheme. He's got a yellow painted house with white trim, and he's got a red roof on his house. Very interesting color scheme that has persisted over time, apparently. And from another one of my reference books, here's that same color scheme. This was part of an interior over mantle wall space that was painted. And look, there's that same color scheme. Sort of a yellowish, ivory colored painted clapboards, white trim, and a red door. So I think it's really interesting that this house possibly is a very, very old color combination that has come down to us over all these decades. Okay, so gradually as people's wealth increased, they could afford to paint their whole house red, and white was even more expensive than red at this point. Lead white paint, yes, lead white that makes you terribly sick, was the next step up in terms of having your house painted. So now more and more people painted not just their barns, not just their outhouses red, they could paint their whole house red and with a white outline. Peter Palmer tells us that when he bought the Deming house there, does everybody know where I'm talking about when I talk about the the Deming House at the bottom, on the east side of Morse Hill Road, right where it meets Route 7A. Yeah, right there on the right, where the pond is, Deming Pond, that's the house I'm talking about. This is what it looks like. I love this description, right, when Peter bought it. For sale, 18th century farmhouse on 2.75 acres, approximately 900 feet frontage on Dorset Road. Attached barn, complete with ballroom overhead, a reminder of days when place was a stagecoach stop. Ready for restoration. We know what that's code for, don't we? You're gonna spend more money on this restoration than you bought for the whole house, right? And Peter says, although it looks white now, he says, yeah, it needed a paint job bad. The white paint coat here was about 50 years old, but he said it was red underneath. So that's interesting, that an entire stagecoach stop was painted red. Okay, so little by little now, again, as local wealth increased, people could paint their houses white. And this kind of corresponded with the Greek Revival style. The Greek Revival style was a throwback to what we understood was the democratic ideal going on in Greece. Now this is post-revolutionary America. We were starting to copy European things. And for us, it meant painting your old barn and painting everything white that you possibly could. It was a sign of cleanliness. It was a sign of having culture. Okay, so little by little, all of our houses started to be painted white. Then along came Andrew Jackson Downing in 1842. And he did a whole book for cottage residences, and that would include designs for around here in more rural areas now. And these were the colors that he was proposing. So in other words, he hated white. He thought that white houses just did not blend in with the landscape well at all. And so for his cottage residences, not his townhouses, but for his cottage residences, these were the colors that he was promoting. And they were shades of gray. He says A, B, and C were shades of gray, and E, F, and G were of a drab or fawn color, fawn, F-A-W-N color. By 1869, all of those rather pale colors had deepened and deepened and deepened. Now remember, by 1869, we're post-Civil War, the railroad has arrived. The railroad is now bringing in pre-mixed cans of paint. So the world has changed. We're no longer stuck with paint that you have to make yourself. You can go to the store and buy paint. So the holly house that I showed you a little bit early of the stick style, remember that? The stick style holly house was painted colors. We just don't know originally what, because we don't have an original photo of this house from the 19th century. This is just from, this is just a Googled, when you Google on stick style houses, you get a bunch of houses like this. None of them are white, I can tell you that. At this time period, if you were building a new house, post-Civil War, you didn't paint it white. You painted it these bright colors. Likewise, the Musser house that I showed you earlier, I showed you this picture, shingle style, remember that? It was originally a dark color because somewhere around 1900 to 1905, when this style was popular, nobody covered their house with shingles, cedar shingles, and then painted them. They were a natural color, or maybe they were stained a darker color, but nobody was painting their new shingle style house white. Also here on the north side of Church Street, the Bourne Sheldon House, originally from 1885, and that's this center section here, all right? This was center section, is 1885, and the wings were added somewhere around 1935, was originally brown, all right? So we have another brown house that was made white later on. Over in Mad Tom Road, we have this cute little, what's called vernacular Italianate, as opposed to high style Italianate. The picture shows a greenhouse with green shutters. Today, it's beige with brown trim, but just imagine how great that would be if they put the green shutters back on. I'm gonna put that bug in their ear. Put the green shutters back on and it would be a perfect Victorian color scheme. Wallace Nutting was a man who really, really tried to promote this whole idea of the colonial revival style. And in his book, he did Massachusetts beautiful, Connecticut beautiful, New Hampshire beautiful. He referenced the old red schoolhouse as one of the photos. And the book is from 1922, the old red schoolhouse. Here in Dorset, we have the Dorset Academy on Dorset West Road from 1870 to 1840. Do you think it was ever painted? What do you think? Kind of shabby, right? And when the 1986 National Register nomination was written, this was the only red building left in Dorset. All right, and it's red to this day. Okay, so how did we get to white houses and green shutters? I've shown you a lot of pictures, I think, to kind of give you the idea that, oh yeah, these houses weren't always white, were they? So we have to look backwards a little bit. So first of all, remember what I said, that an unpainted house perhaps had a coat of pine tar mixed with linseed oil, right? No color at all. Okay, then let's look at the technology. Paint is basically dried pigment ground up and added to glue of some kind. Linseed oil was a type of glue. Red paint you could get by heating up yellow ochre particles and mixing it with linseed oil. White paint is made from white lead dust combined with linseed oil. And green paint is verdigris, right? You know that word, right? Verdigris, it's a copper acetate. Copper turns green over time, right? That's copper acetate. Mix that in with oil. So that's the reason why green paint became the #1 and first bestseller in 1866. Green paint, okay? So with the arrival of the railroad and the development of ready-made paint, we now have more availability. Everybody has more opportunity to paint their house. And the last item that you need to remember is this whole colonial revival period descended upon us. Places like Colonial Williamsburg, especially, expounded on the look back, the look towards reviving what we thought was the first and the best part of our history. The DuPont family was assembling what we know as the Winterthur Museum today. The Rockefellers were assembling what we know as Colonial Williamsburg. A.B. Wells, with his money from the American Optical Company, was putting together Old Sturbridge Village. And Mrs. Havemeyer hobnobbed with all these people, and she started assembling what became as Shelburne Museum. But all of this was, in the 1900 to 1920s, was a backlash, as I mentioned a little earlier, to all of the wave of immigrants, people from Italy, people from Ukraine, people from Poland. Oh no, we are English people. We need to look back and be proud of our ancestors who founded this country, founded this country. And so that's what the colonial revival period of the early 20th century was all about, and it had a big influence here. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about, and I hope you will help me spread the word about this. This is our final section now. If you look at the Department of the Interior website, they're the people who give the National Register title. What are the restrictions? What are the regulations? Because I've had a lot of people say to me, oh, I would never want that to happen to my house because they tell you what you can and can't do with your house. There are no, under federal law, the listing of a property in the National Register places no restrictions on what a non-federal, that would be you and me, right? We're not feds. A non-federal owner may do with their property, up to and including destruction, unless the property is involved in a project that takes federal money. Okay? So then I went to the State of Vermont website to say, well, what does the State of Vermont say? Where are people getting this idea that you can't do anything you want to your house? And I couldn't find anything. There was nothing on the Agency of Commerce website of the State of Vermont that tells you what you may or may not do with your property. Couldn't find a thing. So I wrote to Devin Coleman, I've included his email for you if you would like to do this also. And I asked him, what does it say? Where can I find information in preparation for this presentation that I'm doing today? Where does it say that you can't do anything you want to do to your house? And this is what he wrote back. So this is directly his email. First and foremost, listing in the state or National Registers of Historic Places is an honorific designation. It's an honor that documents the history and significance of a property. Listing does not, in and of itself, impose any restrictions on the property owner's use, maintenance, or disposition. That means destruction of the property. You buy a house, you can knock it down if you want to. So I thought, where is this idea coming from? You have to have a design district in place, all right? So this is from the Dorset Town Zoning Bylaws, all right? Copied right off. Subject to meeting the procedural requirements, a design area is established as an overlay on top of the underlying zoning district to preserve the historical, architectural, or cultural character of the district, and to prevent development, which by their incompatibility with the prevailing building patterns will diminish the quality of the prevailing patterns. So this is saying, and we heard the woman who's the head of the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation say this again at the meeting Monday night, was it, Nancy?
Thursday night.
Tuesday night. I specifically
Tuesday
asked that
to Monday.
question.
Monday.
I put her right on the spot. And I said to her, there are some people in this town who believe that since we have a design district, we don't have to pay attention to the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines. Would you please clarify that? And she said, you have to have a historic district in place, and then the design overlay is voted in on top of that. So I wasn't here at the time, folks. I can't tell you, but apparently, if the historic designation was given in '85, by 1986 there was a design district voted in on top, and that's where the rules and regulations were put in place to say, if you want to do something to your home, you have to bring it in front of the design review board, because this is the way we like it. And that's how it started. And if you would like to write to Devin Coleman about it, you may. Okay, he's our state architectural historian. All right, does that make sense? Did I explain that? Yeah, okay, thank you. And so, sources for more information, I brought just a couple here today. First of all, like I said, the house that talks about Colonel William Marsh and his whole history of that house. And there's another very nice one that I have several, but I just brought a couple. This, A Building History of Northern New England is a really, really excellent source. It talks about paint and anything else you might want. So I'll leave that up for a while in case anybody wants to copy that down. And thank you very much. I hope I haven't bored you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Now, this is a period where we open up the floor to questions for Michelle. And I'm going to be the icebreaker and open up a question that I think the answer is no. But since you've looked at so many houses in Dorset, you might have a yes, and if you do, that would be great. Are there any examples of Richardson-style buildings in Dorset?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I've never come across that.
I don't know, right. I don't believe so. It's that Greek revival style that I mentioned more than once. That's the one you're going to see over and over and over again in various permutations. The stick style was rare. That shingle style is rare. It's more or less the earlier Greek revival, whether the gable front or the eaves front Greek revival
Okay,
style.
great.
No, I think you're right. I didn't find one either.
Yeah. Well, if you do, let me know. Anyway, more questions for Michelle?
Go.
Where was the Dorset Academy, down on the West Road? What and where and?
I think the information I found that on the website, right? The Historical Society website had the photo. I think it was 1815 to 40.
Yes.
Is when it was operational, is that
It
right,
was
John?
actually on the corner of Route 30 and P Street. The Baptist church was on one corner, it's now empty, and the house that was on the north corner was the Dorset Academy.
I would just like to say that the majority of these slides, especially at the old houses, are here at the Dorset Historical Society, which brings up the importance of, if you're come across something that you think relates to the town or the village, bring it on. We would certainly be willing to copy it or, and return the original to you, but it's really important that these things get preserved, so.
Thank you, yeah, thanks for, good point. Yes, sir.
I hear once in a while about houses having been moved from the Pagan reservoir. And have you come across any, or do you know?
The houses that were moved from the reservoir?
Right.
Yeah, there were, I mentioned, about 8 of them that I quickly showed the pictures of. We could do a whole topic, right, a whole presentation just on the Quabbin houses.
And we have a large section in our library on books on Quabbin.
Okay.
And we even have a book written by Terry Tyler on the houses in Dorset that were moved from those 4 towns, available in our gift shop.
Was the house next door one of them?
No.
I don't believe so. No, that's
No.
always been there. And then 2 doors down is the Harwood house, I believe.
Yeah, the two closest Quabbin houses here are what are now Flower Book Pottery, and then the first house down on the Hollow Road. Those were 2. The pottery was originally a small church
Yeah.
in Enfield, Massachusetts, and the first house on the Hollow Road,
Right or left?
across from the Bowers house, so left, was actually made by Charlie Wade for his daughter, and it was made from parts, extra parts of houses that he had no use for. And the floor is the floor of the old bowling alley across from Prentice Pond. So, too much information, but there you have it.
And it's the Charlie Wade houses, that, he's the one that moved the majority.
But do
Of
you
the
know,
Enfield
do you know
houses.
how he actually moved them?
You take them apart
Did
or
he move
apart?
them in one
No,
piece
no, no,
or-
no.
Yeah, that's a discussion. I mean, we can get into for hours on the Quabbin Reservoir. The man who wrote the book is 3 rows behind you, in fact. But they took them apart, numbered the pieces, and then reassembled them here, is the short story answer.
That's the same way the Dorset house that was moved out of North Dorset up to the Shelburne Museum. They took them apart, numbered all the pieces,
Okay.
loaded them onto railroad cars, parts, and shipped them up to Shelburne.
Railroad.
Yeah, Sue.
What can the design review committee restrict?
How, or, I'm sorry, I think I missed
What-
part of the
what-
question.
What can they restrict or eliminate or keep you from doing?
Basically, the materials need to at least look the same as what's already there. So, for example, if the pottery here down Route 30 wanted to put up a new sign, the new sign has to look the same as the old sign. In other words, they couldn't put up a neon sign out front. Or the bank could not put up a neon sign out front, yeah. The intent is to, people wanted to keep apparently the look that was in place when the National Registry designation was put into place in 1985. And people decided, we like this. So personally, I'm very much interested, if anybody wants to work with me, I'm very much interested in doing some research to find what were all the original colors that were here, Now that you all know this town was not always all white, right? That there were some other colors. I'd be very interested to work with anybody who also would be interested in doing that.
Does the design overlay zone prevent homeowners from raising their houses but like leaving a facade but then completely redoing the house?
No,
in the
I think
back?
you're right. I think if you really wanted to raise your house, you would have to leave the facade. And that's a good point, though. Thanks for asking that. You can do just about anything you want, so long as you can't see it from the road.
Okay.
That's That's the deal. I mean, even the inn here, I think recently put up some air conditioning pipes or units or something, and they're in trouble because you can see it from the road. So, that's the deal. It has to look the same from the road. Yeah. And if you're on a corner, you're in a little more trouble.
It didn't, just didn't apply for a permit.
Hmm.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I have two more quick things. Bill and Sheila Childs have provided us with some great snacks and drink. Help yourselves out in the other room. Also, and I treacherous this, but Michele mentioned Wallace Nutting and his New England Beautiful books. I have to mention what he was really famous for were hand-colored photographs. He made thousands of dollars a day with a factory filled with, I think, 200 women hand painting them. And there are some of Dorset. But he was so popular that a Manchester photographer of the time, Lester Farnham, tried to get into the business as well. And in our collections we have a Lester Farnham hand-colored photograph of Dorset Village, very yellow. And also Hunt Gilbert of Dorset obviously was trying to get from the postcard business to the hand-colored photograph business. And we have some reproductions of those right on the hallway right now. In case you were wondering what all of this has to do with Dorset. Thank you.
Presentation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, it's done.
Holy moly. Could you control that?